There's a strange pattern in human behavior. Something so consistent it almost feels universal. People rarely appreciate presence until it's gone. They treat consistency like background noise, and they overlook the ones who stand by their side. But the moment you step back, the moment your voice fades, and your presence becomes a memory, they suddenly begin to feel the silence you leave behind. This video is not about revenge. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding your value in a world where people too often take it for granted. It's about learning the quiet strength of detachment, and why those who overlook you today will ache for you tomorrow. This is for anyone who's ever been dismissed, underestimated, or quietly pushed aside, only to watch the same people realize your worth far too late. If this resonates with you, if you've ever felt the sting of being forgotten and the peace that comes when you rise above it, stay with me. And if you find something in these words that moves you, consider subscribing to this channel. Here, we don't chase approval. We pursue inner power. Let's begin. Chapter 1. They assume you'll stay. People don't miss what they believe will never leave. There's an unspoken arrogance in the comfort others feel when they think you'll always be around. It starts subtly. Your kindness gets expected, your time taken for granted, your efforts absorbed like sunlight on a warm afternoon. You become familiar. You become constant. And in that constancy, they stop seeing the strength it takes to stay. You see, the human mind is built to filter out what doesn't change. The brain is wired for contrast, not consistency. And when someone always shows up, always answers the message, always forgives, always listens, it becomes easy to forget that what they give is a choice, not an obligation, not a default setting. They begin to think your patience is bottomless, that your care is automatic, that your attention is owed. It's a quiet erosion of respect. And it often starts with love. Because when you love, you give. When you care, you show up. But if that love isn't matched, not in the same style, not with the same gestures, but with equal intention, then you're giving into a silence that grows. A silence where they stop asking how you feel, where they stop wondering what you need, where they stop noticing the small moments you create. And yet, you keep showing up because you hope. You hope they'll see it. You hope they'll realize it on their own. You think, maybe, just maybe, your consistency will inspire clarity, that your loyalty will be its own lesson. But they won't see it, not while you're still there. They assume you'll stay because you've stayed before. They count on your forgiveness because you've given it before. They rely on your support because it's never failed them. And the longer you remain, the more invisible your value becomes. That's the paradox of reliability. The stronger and more stable you are, the easier it is for others to stop seeing you. You become a fixture in the room, a piece of furniture they walk past every day, never really noticing anymore. Not because you're unremarkable, but because you've made yourself so available, so reliable, so emotionally present, that they've forgotten it's not a given. It's earned. They forget that your presence is a gift that could be withdrawn, that your attention is not a right, but a privilege. And when people believe you'll never walk away, they stop offering reasons for you to stay. It happens in relationships, in friendships, in families. You become the one they lean on. And they assume the leaning will never shift. They stop checking if the foundation is cracking. They stop listening for stress in your silence. They stop seeing you as someone who might need to be held too. But the truth is this: even the most steadfast soul has limits. Even the most patient heart grows tired. And one day, without fireworks, Without a fight, without a dramatic scene, you pull away. Not out of spite, not to manipulate, but because the silence around your efforts has grown too loud to ignore. You pull away because your soul finally understands what your mind tried to deny. Staying is not strength when it erodes your spirit. And when you do step back, when the texts go unanswered, when your energy retreats, when your care becomes your own again, suddenly the air feels different to them. They look around, expecting your light, and realize they never knew how much warmth it gave. So if you've ever been taken for granted, ever felt like your loyalty became your cage, remember this: their assumption was never your responsibility. You were not wrong to care. You were not weak for staying, but your value doesn't shine until you leave the room. And that realization will hit them, just not while you're still holding the door open. Have you ever been in that place where your presence became invisible until you pulled away? Share your story in the comments. You never know who might need to hear it. Chapter 2. Your absence hits hard. When you finally step back, really step back, it doesn't echo immediately. At first, they barely notice. Maybe they think you're just busy. Maybe they assume you'll circle back like you always do. There's a delay in their recognition because they're still under the illusion that you orbit them, that your absence is temporary. A pause in the same old rhythm. But slowly, steadily, something shifts. They send a message, and it sits unanswered. They post something, and you don't react. They share a moment, and you're not there to witness it. And that subtle ache begins to stir. An emptiness grows where your presence used to be, like a room with the light turned off. Your silence, once overlooked, now becomes loud. You see, your presence had a weight, a calm gravity that kept them grounded. Even if they didn't realize it, you were the quiet certainty in their chaos, the mirror they looked into when they doubted themselves, the refuge they leaned on without asking. And now that you're gone, they feel every inch of that loss. They scroll through old messages just to hear your voice in their head again. They revisit conversations where you gave them clarity, validation, comfort. They play back your words, not just what you said, but how you said it. The way you made them feel safe, seen, supported. And suddenly, all those things they brushed aside seem enormous. That warmth you gave freely, it's gone. That patience they never thanked you for, now it stings. That steadiness they assumed was eternal, it vanished without drama. Your absence becomes their mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reveals what they failed to see. It reflects their neglect, their silence, their passivity. It reminds them of all the times they could have reached out but didn't, all the chances they had to hold you closer, but stayed still. And here's what hits hardest: they can't rewind. There's no instant fix, no grand gesture that guarantees your return. Because you didn't leave to punish. You stepped back to protect your peace. You let go not because you stopped caring, but because they stopped showing you that they did. They don't just miss you. They miss the version of themselves that existed in your light. They miss how you believed in them, how you listened without judgment, how you made space for their flaws while gently reminding them of their potential. Without you, they feel less understood, less sure, less seen. And that emptiness isn't just about you being gone. It's about who they become without you. That's the real power of distance. It doesn't just remove you from their life. It confronts them with the reality of who they are without you. And they struggle with it. They might try to fill the void, distract themselves, talk louder, laugh harder, move on too quickly, but none of it lands the same. Because deep down, they know it's not just anyone they're missing, it's you, your depth, your presence, your spirit. And when that realization settles in, it often doesn't bring peace. It brings a haunting question. Did I push away the person who saw me most clearly? By the time they feel it fully, you're already gone, not out of bitterness, not because you hate them, but because your healing required distance. And once peace replaces chaos, it's hard to invite the storm back in. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and even for them is to disappear long enough for them to meet the consequences of their actions. Let me ask you something. Have you ever experienced someone finally understanding your worth, only after you walked away? Share what that felt like in the comments. Your voice might echo in someone else's healing. Chapter 3. They lose their focus. At first, they think they're fine without you. The world keeps spinning. Their routines remain intact. They keep posting, texting, joking, pretending. But deep in the quiet parts of their mind, something begins to unravel, a subtle loss of clarity. They struggle to name it at first. It's not loneliness, not exactly. It's not guilt either. It's a disorientation, a soft unraveling of the mental compass they didn't realize you helped them calibrate. Because the truth is this: your presence brought focus, not in loud or obvious ways, but in the quiet way you made them feel like they mattered. In how you listened when no one else did. In the way your words seemed to strip away their distractions and remind them of what actually mattered. Without you, the world becomes noisier, but not clearer. They start forgetting what grounded them. That encouragement you used to offer before their big day, that check-in during their spiral, that simple, steady voice that reminded them not to let temporary emotion ruin permanent values. It's gone, and now they're left to face the raw static of their own thoughts alone. You weren't their guide, but you were their anchor. And when an anchor is lifted, the drift doesn't always come immediately. It takes time. It creeps in. Their decisions start feeling less certain. Their conversations more shallow. They seek validation in places they used to criticize. They chase stimulation instead of connection. They grasp for distractions to replace the depth you brought. And none of it satisfies, because nothing compares to someone who genuinely sees you. Not for how charming you are, not for what you can offer, but for how your soul moves. You gave them that kind of mirror, the kind that doesn't flatter, but reflects truth with warmth. You reminded them of their better self, not with sermons, but with subtlety. And now that mirror is gone. So, they start second-guessing. They reread their own words and feel the emptiness in them. They feel unsure after conversations that used to feel affirming. They act out, sometimes without realizing it, flirting more, posting more, partying harder, chasing any signal that they still matter to someone. But here's the part they never expected. You were part of their mental clarity. Your steadiness was the lens they didn't know they were looking through. And when it vanishes, the world becomes blurry. Their emotional compass spins, not wildly, but just enough to make every direction feel off. Every conversation a little less fulfilling. Every decision a little more chaotic. This is when they start to feel unmoored. They might not cry. They might not even speak your name. But inside, a low hum of regret begins to play. A sense that something real slipped through their fingers. That the person who held space for their truth is no longer checking in. No longer watching. No longer. And that's the part that stings most. You're not angry. You're not bitter. You're just gone. There's a calm to your absence that unnerves them, a peace they can't touch. Because even now, as they drift in their own fog, they sense that you've risen above, that you've found a rhythm that no longer includes them, that while they flail for focus, you're sharpening yours. That contrast hurts more than silence. And as the days stretch on, they try to replace you, not with people, but with habits, with distractions. But nothing fits. Nothing aligns the way your presence did, because your clarity wasn't loud. It was the kind that brought stillness to their chaos. And now the chaos is returning. So they lose focus, not just on you, but on themselves, on who they were when they were around you, on what mattered, on the values you helped reflect back to them. And this is where longing begins. Not for the relationship, but for the clarity that came with it. If you've ever watched someone drift without you, not because you cursed them, but because your absence held a mirror, tell me what you saw. The comments are open for your story. Someone out there might be lost in the same fog, and your words could guide them home. Chapter 4. Their heart feels exposed. Time does something strange when you're gone. At first, it moves too fast for them to notice the absence. The hours blur. The distractions keep them afloat. They surround themselves with noise. Conversations, outings, screens. Anything to avoid the echo that your silence left behind. But then something shifts. It happens in a quiet moment. Perhaps a pause between tasks, or a glance at something that reminds them of you. A song, a scent, a memory unearthed by the weather. Suddenly, the air feels heavier. The heart, more naked, and without warning. They're not just aware that you're gone, they feel it. And it doesn't feel safe. You see, when someone like you disappears, someone who gave presence without demands, someone who saw their complexity and didn't flinch, it leaves them vulnerable, not just to the world, but to themselves. You were a shelter, even if they never admitted it. You were the space where their walls could lower without crumbling. Now those walls are all they have, and they begin to feel suffocating. Their heart feels exposed, not because you broke it, but because your absence forces them to confront what they tried to bury. All the things they avoided while you were around. All the truths they pushed down. The patterns they didn't want to face. The deeper fears they hoped you would fix, simply by being near. But you weren't their healer. You were a witness. You stood there calmly, without judgment. You didn't force them to change. You inspired it. And now that you're gone, there's no one left to balance the weight they carry. No one to reflect the parts of them that were growing. So those parts begin to retreat. And what's left is exposure. The armor they wore suddenly feels heavy. The games they played feel childish. The distractions no longer distract. They scroll back through memories. They remember your calm during their storms, your presence in their panic, your warmth in their coldness. And they feel a sudden chill, not from the weather but from the realization that they're alone again. Not physically, emotionally, alone with their mess. This is where the facade starts to crack. They may still act as if everything's fine, still laugh, still show up. But in the privacy of their own thoughts, your absence isn't just a gap. It's a wound, one they can't explain to others, one they can't even fully articulate to themselves. Because how do you explain the absence of someone who made you feel more like yourself? They don't miss a role. They miss you. They miss the way you didn't flinch at their flaws. The way you held them to a higher standard without shame. The way your silence said more than empty words ever could. You didn't rescue them, but you understood them, and in your understanding, they felt safe. Now the safety is gone. And that's what exposure feels like. Not just being vulnerable, but realizing how much someone else's presence covered your emotional nakedness. They start to feel embarrassed, not of what they did, but of what they didn't do. The thank yous they never said, the care they didn't return, the conversations they dismissed too quickly, the way they pulled away when they should have leaned in. And this reflection doesn't just hurt, it humbles. Because for the first time, they can't blame you. You didn't walk away in a storm. You didn't leave in rage. You slipped away in peace. And peace is hard to fight. It doesn't give them a villain to hate. It gives them a void to contemplate. And in that void, their heart opens in ways it never did before. They might not reach out, not yet. They might not confess what they're feeling, but in the quiet hours, in the in-between moments, they feel the full weight of your absence, and it's heavier than they expected. Let me ask you this: have you ever been someone's shelter, only to watch them feel the cold after you left? What was that like for you? Share it in the comments. Your truth may help someone uncover their own. Chapter 5. They wonder about you. When the silence stretches, and the absence solidifies into something real, something permanent, a new emotion takes root in their mind. Curiosity, not the playful kind, not the casual wondering of what are they up to. This is deeper, restless, unsettling. They begin to wonder about you in the still moments, when the noise dies down, when they're brushing their teeth, when the music stops playing, when their screen dims and the room falls quiet. It's in those pauses that your absence sharpens, that your name echoes in their chest without invitation. They wonder what you're doing, truly doing, not just what you're posting. Are you thinking of them? Are you still angry? Or worse, have you simply moved on? And it's that last thought that haunts them. Because moving on means you're no longer affected. It means your silence is not a performance. It's a peace. It means they no longer have a place in your mental world. And the ego struggles with that. The mind resists that, because when someone has lived for so long believing you'll always be within reach, the idea of you being gone, not just absent but truly detached, is unbearable. So they start inventing stories. Maybe you met someone new. Maybe you're thriving in ways they never expected. Maybe you're happier now that they're no longer draining your energy. And whether these stories are true or not doesn't matter. They create tension within them. A quiet ache, an unspoken regret. They begin to compare. They remember how steady your presence was, how your attention felt calm, not chaotic, how your affection came with no strings, but also no confusion. And now, they look at the people around them and start to notice how rare that was. The conversations they have feel more performative, the laughter more hollow, the touch less grounding. Because you weren't just another person in their life. You were a presence, a centeredness. You carried yourself with a self-respect that didn't beg, and a warmth that didn't suffocate. And when you left, you didn't slam the door. You simply stopped knocking. That kind of exit haunts people, and so they start observing from the shadows. Watching your stories, rereading old messages, lingering in places where your digital footprints might still exist. Not to say anything, but to feel something, to grasp some remnant of the connection they lost. They wonder if you're as composed as you seem, if your silence masks sadness, if maybe, just maybe, you still check on them the way they check on you. But the difference is, you don't. Because the detachment you've cultivated isn't cold, it's earned. You've paid the emotional price for clarity. You've withdrawn not to disappear, but to rediscover, to come back to yourself. And now that you've found that peace, you won't trade it again. Still, they wonder. They wonder if you ever felt the same ache, if you ever stared at the ceiling and remembered the sound of their laugh, if you still remember that night when things felt easy. They try to piece together your version of the story, but they can't, because your silence isn't a clue. It's a conclusion. That mystery burns. It makes them restless. It keeps them up at night. And it transforms your memory into a presence again, paradoxically stronger in absence than you ever were in proximity. The very act of wondering makes you larger in their mind. Because what we cannot understand, we cannot forget. So if you've ever reached that point, where your absence began to haunt the ones who couldn't value your presence, write this in the comments. They wonder now, but I no longer do. Let it be a quiet mark of your peace. Chapter 6. Others highlight your worth. Here's the part they never anticipate. The moment the world begins to echo your value back to them. Because while they've been sitting with the weight of your absence, while they've been wondering where you went and what you're feeling, other people have been noticing you too. The same traits they took for granted, others now admire. Your quiet strength, your thoughtful presence, your measured words, your emotional balance. These are no longer background qualities in someone else's life. They are now front and center in conversations that don't involve them at all, and they begin to hear about you through others. A mutual friend mentions how you've been doing, that you seem better, lighter, more focused. Someone comments on your glow, on your newfound calm, on how you're radiating something they hadn't seen before. And suddenly the person who once made you feel small is hearing about your greatness from every corner but your own lips. That's the power of true growth. You don't have to announce it. It announces itself. They start noticing how others lean in when you speak. How you draw people not by effort, but by essence. You don't entertain, you embody. You don't chase, you attract. And when others begin to praise you, it doesn't sound like flattery. It sounds like recognition, like long overdue acknowledgement for things you always carried, but they never chose to see. And that burns. Because now they're not just missing you, they're watching you rise. They're watching others treat you with the reverence they never gave. They're seeing the world admire the same qualities they dismissed. And it stirs something deep, something painful, something raw. Jealousy doesn't come from your success. It comes from the realization that they had a front row seat and looked away. Now they sit in the back, watching strangers fall in love with what they were once bored by. They remember how you used to send good morning messages, not just out of habit, but with intention. How you asked questions that mattered. How you celebrated their wins, no matter how small. And now they see someone else getting that energy. And they know it's real, because they can see the shift in you. You're not pretending to be strong. You are strong. You're not faking confidence. You're moving with a quiet certainty that comes from healing, from choosing peace over performance. And what stings most is this. They could have grown with you, but they stayed stagnant while you evolved. And now they're not watching your glow up. They're watching your return to self. A self they never really took time to understand. Others see it now. Others validate it. Others speak your name with admiration. And every time they hear it, it hits a little harder. Because you've become a story they can no longer rewrite. You've become someone else's inspiration. And that realization changes something. It forces them to confront the truth that their version of you, the one they overlooked, is gone. Replaced by a wiser, fuller, more self-possessed version they no longer have access to. If you've ever been through this where the same people who dismissed you now watch others honor you, tell us below. What was that shift like? Who finally saw what someone else refused to? Your story is not just yours. It might be someone's mirror. Chapter 7. Regret teaches them. Regret is a slow-burning teacher. It doesn't strike all at once. It builds, layer by layer, moment by moment, until it becomes a presence they can no longer avoid. Not in the form of sudden grief, but in a long, quiet reckoning. And it begins with memory. They remember you, not as a highlight, but as a rhythm. The way you always knew when to check in. The calm in your voice when they were unraveling. The way your presence made hard days feel softer. They remember how you gave, how you forgave, how you waited. And they realize you didn't have to. You weren't obligated to stay through their silence. You weren't required to give them grace when they gave you neglect. And that realization cuts deeper than anger ever could. Regret has no one to blame. That's what makes it so powerful. They can't point the finger at you. You didn't explode. You didn't curse their name. You simply stopped showing up. And now every quiet evening feels like a lesson they can't skip. They scroll through old conversations and notice what they missed. The way you hinted at your fatigue. The softness in your tone as it faded. The warnings they brushed off because they thought you'd never leave. But you did. And in doing so, you taught them something no lecture ever could. People don't stay when they're not seen. Love isn't loyalty. It's mutual awareness. And when one person keeps bending while the other keeps standing still, something eventually breaks. So they sit in the aftermath, surrounded by everything they thought mattered, but no longer feels full. And the silence doesn't comfort. It accuses. Because now they see what you gave. They see how rare your patience was, how sacred your presence was. They think of the words they didn't say, the days they didn't call, the affection they withheld. And in that awareness, regret becomes a teacher, not to punish, but to awaken. They start reaching for better words. Start wishing for one more chance. Not always to fix it, but just to say what should have been said. I see you now. I'm sorry I didn't before, but often it's too late. Because the person they're apologizing to no longer exists. You've changed. You've grown. The door they now wish to knock on no longer leads to the same version of you. That's the tragedy of regret. It always arrives after the transformation. And sometimes, the lesson is not to win you back, but to make sure they never treat someone else the same way again. Regret teaches them that real connection doesn't tolerate laziness. That love isn't a given, but a choice, one that has to be made daily. That people who bring peace are not common. And when they leave with a part of the atmosphere. So if you've ever become someone's teacher through regret, if your absence carved wisdom into their soul, leave this in the comments. My silence taught them what my words never could. Let it be a quiet testament to the strength it takes to walk away and never look back. Chapter 8. You become their goal. Their goal. There comes a moment, after the silence, after the ache, after the comparisons, when something shifts again. It happens quietly, rarely with fanfare or revelation, but it's unmistakable. You become their goal, not just someone they miss, not just someone they remember fondly. You become the standard they now measure others against, the presence they seek out in new faces, the emotional tone they long to hear in different voices, the way you looked at them, spoke to them, held them accountable. That becomes the blueprint, because now they've felt what it's like to be genuinely seen. And once you've tasted that kind of clarity, that kind of grounding, it's almost impossible to settle for anything else. They try to move on. They go out. They date. They laugh and post and try to fill the shape you left behind with new distractions, new conversations, new bodies. But none of it feels the same. The chemistry is different. The conversations lack the same gravity. They find themselves checking their watch more often, waiting for that spark, that click, that ease, and it doesn't come. Because it wasn't just you, it was who they were when they were with you. And now, no matter who they're around, they can't recreate it. They can't feel that same pull, that sense of home, that alignment. Because it was never about noise or novelty, it was about depth. Your presence had weight. Your energy was intentional. And now that it's gone, it's irreplaceable. You have become the one they try to reach. Not with steps, but with changes. They reflect on what went wrong. They replay their choices like old records, hearing now what they couldn't hear then. Your calm responses, your subtle boundaries, your quiet exits. They see it all with new eyes, and in seeing it they begin to shift. They start reading the kinds of books you read, listening to voices like yours. They surround themselves with the same energy they once took for granted. Not to copy, but to connect, to inch closer to the vibration they lost when they lost you. And some will try to become worthy of your return. They'll heal what they once neglected. They'll tend to their own wounds. They'll step into growth, not to win you back, but because losing you showed them who they could become. You are no longer their fallback. You're their inspiration, their silent target, the internal voice they now measure themselves against. They start saying things you used to say, living in ways you used to model. They show up to their own life differently, more aware, more present, and even if you're not around to see it, your impact moves within them like a current. But that doesn't mean you should return. You becoming their goal does not obligate you to re-enter their life. Sometimes your role is not to walk the journey with them, but to be the moment that awakened it. You become the lesson that reshaped their path, not with anger, not with punishment, but with distance, with dignity, with that quiet, unwavering decision that said, I won't shrink just to stay. So they grow, but this time it's without you. And perhaps that's the most powerful position you'll ever hold in someone's story. Not as the ending, not as the villain, not even as the love of their life, but as the reason they finally chose to evolve. Have you ever watched someone transform after losing you? Not out of manipulation, but out of realization. If so, share it below. Your story might be the encouragement someone needs to hold their boundary a little longer. Chapter 9. Your distance defines you. Detachment, when done with intention, becomes a defining trait. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's loud, but because it clarifies everything. When you pulled away, it wasn't a tactic. It wasn't a punishment. It was a decision, rooted in quiet clarity. A decision that said, my energy is no longer up for negotiation. And from that point forward, everything about you changed. The way you walked, the way you carried yourself, the way you spoke or didn't speak. The things you used to tolerate, gone. The apologies you used to chase, no longer pursued. The boundaries you once explained, over and over, now simply enforced in silence. This is where your distance stops being an action and starts becoming an identity. You are no longer someone who clings, who explains, who performs. You become someone who chooses where to show up, where to pour energy, who gets access to your presence. And that, more than anything, reshapes the way the world responds to you. People feel your absence before they feel your presence now. Because when you arrive, it's deliberate.
You're not everywhere. You're not in everyone's inbox. You're not constantly available.
You've reclaimed the space that was once too easily given. And now it defines your gravity. That distance says more than words ever could. It says, I've seen what I needed to see. I've given what I could give. I've waited long enough to be met where I stand. And now, I simply stand alone, not in loneliness, in sovereignty. And those who once assumed they could waltz in and out of your life, who thought your warmth would always be waiting, now face a version of you they never imagined. Untouchable, yet not cold. Present but not reachable. Alive but not available. You still care, but not like before. Your caring no longer spills, it's measured. Your compassion is no longer a flood. It's a well, deep and private. Your time is no longer scattered, it's sacred. And this new version of you, sculpted by silence, molded by loss, shines in ways the old you never could. 'Cause the old you was always reaching. The new you is rooted. That distance becomes your definition. Not as armor, but as clarity. Not as isolation, but as elevation. And now, people approach you differently. They speak more carefully. They observe more closely. They feel the shift in your presence. The way you don't need them. The way your peace doesn't depend on their validation. The way your eyes no longer plead. That's what real detachment does. It removes the need, not the love. It maintains connection without grasping. It allows space for others to grow, but not at your expense. You are no longer entangled. You are free, and in that freedom, you become magnetic, not to chaos, but to clarity. Not to people who need fixing, but to those who know how to hold space, and perhaps most importantly, to yourself. If your distance has ever brought you back to yourself, if it's ever made you feel more you than ever before, write this in the comments. My distance is not silence, it's strength. Let it echo as your final boundary. Conclusion. They only miss you when you're gone. Not because your presence wasn't valuable, but because it was so constant, so steady, so dependable, that it became invisible to them. Until it wasn't. Until the morning came, and you didn't check in. Until the storm came, and your shelter was no longer open. Until the silence they once found comforting became deafening. And then, they missed you. But you didn't disappear to be missed. You stepped back to be whole. To remember who you were before you overgave. To return to your core. To rise not in revenge, but in resilience. That's the path of the Stoic. That's the quiet, unwavering dignity of someone who has learned that their presence is a gift, not a given. That emotional maturity doesn't beg to be seen. It allows others to feel the loss and learn. So wherever you are in your journey, whether you've just stepped back or you've walked miles away already, know this: you are not petty for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for choosing your calm. You are not selfish for demanding reciprocity. You are strong. If this video resonated with you, if it stirred something in your spirit, don't just click away. Let this be a moment of reflection, a turning point. Leave a comment with your story, your strength, or even just a few words that helped you through. And if you want more reminders like this, more calm in the chaos, more clarity in the noise, then subscribe. This is what we do here. We rise quietly. We move wisely. We grow together. Until next time, stand tall, stay silent, and let your absence speak louder than your presence ever could.